this is true, if we as Christians, those of us who follow Jesus and follow the texts see them as scripture, this is very discouraging because Jesus is criticizing Peter and saying that he's Satan and he's going to be in hell and that it would be better for a millstone to be put around his neck. So why venerate Peter? Why do we even bother trying to venerate the original apostles and Peter? The answer I give is that, number one, we have to realize with these past videos, this series of videos, this helps my students explain the political and theological context in which the gospel writers are writing. These are Pauline Christians, Pauline texts, and they're going to favor the Gentile mission, and therefore they've got some bias against some of the Jewish exclusive faction. But the other part of the answer is, if you want to salvage the view of the apostles, then read Luke. So let me give you some examples of what Luke, the author of Luke, comes along and he sees this portrayal of the apostles and of Peter in Matthew and Mark. Probably this is what scholars are guessing that he is seeing, that Luke is coming after these texts and that he's responding to those. So here's what Luke does. I'll put here up on the screen. What Luke tries to do is to rescue their reputation. And one of the examples is that when Jesus rebukes the apostles during a storm and declares that they have no faith, if you remember we talked about that, notice that in the Gospel of Luke, there is no rebuke. That's in Matthew 8, but also look at Luke 8, 22 through 25. The author of Luke specifically leaves that part out. In the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus saves Peter from drowning, and he says, "You of little faith," remember this, Matthew 14, this is not included in Luke, nor is it included in John. They do not contain this story, or they contain the story, but they don't have Jesus saying to Peter, "You of little faith." In Mark and Matthew, when Jesus is frustrated because of the disciples' lack of understanding, again, this is Matthew 15 and 16, and also Mark 7 and Mark 8. The author of Luke omits these rebukes. He does not include them. Jesus calls Peter Satan, if you remember, as we talked about in Mark and Matthew, specifically calls him Satan. But the author of Luke changes this episode by deleting Jesus' attack on Peter. Look specifically at Luke 9:22, and he tries to portray Peter in a more positive light. In Luke, Jesus does not say about his disciples, it would be better. So like in Matthew 18 and Mark 9, if you remember, Jesus says, "It would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depths of the sea." That's some of the harshest criticism that Jesus gives the apostles. But in Luke, it's not there. Luke does not include that part of the tradition in the story. Mark and Matthew, in those Gospels, the apostles repeatedly fall asleep in Gethsemane, as you remember, which causes Jesus to sorrow. He has sorrow over the apostles. This is Matthew 26, 36 through 46, and also Mark 14, 32 through 42. Now, while that's in those Gospels, Luke changes the story. Now, the apostles do fall asleep in Luke, but the author of Luke adds that they fell asleep only because they were grieved. So he's trying to salvage their reputation by saying, yeah, they did fall asleep, but they were grieved. And that's why they fell asleep. This is in Luke 22:45.